From the studios at Pure Life Ministries in Northern Kentucky, it's Purity for Life. Thanks for joining us. Each week, we'll take you where real life meets real Christianity as we tackle the tough issues for those struggling with sexual sin.
Welcome to our latest edition of Purity for Life. I'm your host, Nate Dancer. Coming up this week,
if you are a son of God, you will face God's discipline.
Discipline is never a pleasant thing to experience because it always involves pain. And yet, to a Christian who truly knows the love of God, discipline is something that we can learn to be grateful for. Pastor Steve Gallagher reminds us that God always disciplines his sons and always has a good purpose in it, no matter how difficult the discipline may seem at the time. That's what's coming up on Purity for Life.
Praise the Lord. Man, these guys preached my message for me. And they didn't know what I was going to be talking about. I'll be in Hebrews 12. They didn't know that. Ed may have guessed it, but Adam sure didn't know. Did you guess it? But the Lord knew. The Lord has something to say to you today, right? You have ears to hear? The title of the message is The Blessings. Oh, that sounds good, doesn't it? The blessings. Doesn't that sound good? The blessings of discipline. Man, just doesn't get any better than that. Let's just read this big passage of Scripture just to establish the context. I'm actually only going to be in a couple of verses, but we'll just go ahead and read. I'll start with verse 3. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin, and you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you're without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Okay, now here's my verses. Furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, so that we may share his holiness. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful but sorrowful, yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Now you just saw that fruit right there. You saw it, well, you see it regularly from Pastor Ed, both of whom about 10 years since they went through the programs. But there it is. Now, let me just say a couple of things before we get into this exact subject. While it's true that all God's discipline involves some kind of suffering, not all suffering is a result of God's discipline. Did you catch that sermon? I'm watching to see your look on your face. If it goes total blank, I know we're in trouble. Did you get that? all discipline has some aspect of suffering involved with it, right? If it didn't hurt, it wouldn't be discipline. But not all suffering is a result of God's discipline. You know, the fact of the matter is every human being suffers at some level, some amount in this world. God causes the rain to fall on the righteous and the unrighteous. You know, when the world is at war, everybody suffers. It doesn't, you know, it's just that's the way the climate of the world is. And sometimes world events take over. And we all have to deal with it and respond and react however we can to just get through whatever. But everyone goes through that sort of stuff. The world's mindset with suffering is much different than the child of God. The world, because the world only thinks in terms of right now and living for what they can get out of their temporal stay on earth, of course their whole thinking is to avoid every kind of suffering at all cost and to pursue pleasure at all cost. That's how the world thinks. But that's completely different than the way the people of God think. You know, it's a wonderful thing that Scripture tells us that if you love God, everything that comes your way in life, suffering or good times, hard times, mundane times, all of it, God is going to use for your good. So it's like things that seem like the worst calamity. Somehow, if you love the Lord, now, it doesn't say if you call yourself Christian. It says if you love the Lord. If you love the Lord, somehow He will take every single thing that comes your way and turn it into good for your life. It's amazing, and I can attest to you that it's true. All right, but I'm not going to focus on suffering in general. I want to look at the specific form of suffering, if I could say it that way. That is God's discipline in the lives of His children. Discipline is a family mark. You know, if you are a son of God, you will face God's discipline, as we just heard. And if you're not facing God's discipline, it means you're not a son of God. So when you experience God's discipline, it is really, there's, you know, a blessedness to that it's a sign of your sonship. It's a proof of His love for you. Now, what I hope to accomplish this morning is to instill in you a sense of value in God's discipline in your life. Instead of it being something you have to cringe at the thought of and do your best to just, you know, avoid it if possible, instead of thinking of it in those terms, to truly value it. And it is possible to get to the place where you will do that, where you will value the fact that God is so involved in your life that He is going to bring about times of discipline. You know, James said, what? Count it all joy, right? My brethren, when you encounter various trials. You can't do that unless you have the Spirit of God living in you. You can mouth those words, but if God is not living in you, you cannot count it all joy. It is not possible. It's not possible for an unbeliever to count it all joy when he encounters a trial. So if all that happens inside you when God brings discipline into your life is a cringing away and an attempt to try to get out of it and circumvent it, then you probably should take a good hard look at your spiritual condition. But if you are a child of God, it is possible, believe it or not, to count it all joy. Paul said, now I rejoice in my sufferings for your sake. And again, you can't do that unless the Lord lives within you. These men could see the value of suffering and, God's discipline. Now, I want to paint a picture, and I want to take you back to the message I gave last time. Remember that message, Race of a Lifetime. And, remember that I had that revelation that morning. I was sitting up here, and I just for an instant, I had this sight of this powerful being of love who, didn't I have something up here I used as, yeah, I did this. This is earth, but this being of love is existing outside of time, and, obviously the earth is a puny nothing in comparison to him. And I think I said something about how God is watching your life as you proceed through that timeline. Right? Didn't I say that? And now, of course, Adam didn't know that when he was sharing what he shared, and Ed didn't know I was going to be bringing that up again. And these guys talked and used verses that describe the very thing that I'm talking about right now. God watching your life unfold. But he's not just watching, he's heavily involved. If you are a child of God, he is heavily involved in your life. He's not just standing back and just kind of watching to see what you do. He's in there, intimately and intricately involved, as some powerful writer once said. This is not the sharpest bunch I've ever preached to. Some guys still don't know what I'm talking about. All right. Guys, the Lord has designed the perfect pathway for you. Man, that's amazing. If that could really sink in for you, it would revolutionize your life. It really would. If it could sink in that God has perfectly constructed and designed a pathway for you in life, you would embrace his will wholeheartedly, completely, with no resistance, ever. The reason we resist his will is because he starts doing things that don't correspond to what we want at that moment. So, just like the guy facing down the barrel of his gun, we have a decision to make. And, if we make wrong decisions enough, it's going to end up in our death. So God has perfectly designed a path. But the problem is, so often as we are intent on our own path, and our own purposes, and so on. Jameson Fawcett Brown says, we too much look at each trial by itself instead of taking it in connection with the whole plan of our salvation, as if a traveler were to complain of the steepness and roughness of one turn in the path, without considering that it led him into green pastures on the direct road to the city of habitation. Now, I know they talked a little funny back then, but I think you got the sense of it, right? You got to take into consideration the whole plan that God has for you, and you just have to embrace it, as we just heard. Now, let's look at it in light of your time here at Pure Life. There's the Lord looking down at your life right now. He is there right now looking at you, what's going on in your heart, what's going on in your life, the way you're thinking, and so on. And he understands something that we don't really understand that well. And that is that in a few weeks, a few months, whatever it is, you are going to be leaving Pure Life Ministries, and there is a world system out there that is extremely powerful. And it is going to be enticing you and trying to pull you back in to its thinking. And it doesn't happen instantaneously, and it doesn't happen by a leap, usually. It's usually just a slight, gradual sliding away. Now, Adam, who, by the way, is a board member, that's why he comes up here like this. Adam, I know very well the decisions he has made, because we're very close friends, and we talk about stuff and so on. I know the sacrifices he has made, at least a good part of it. For instance, we were talking about phones and computers. Well, I've known this all along. I've watched him make decisions all along. No, I don't need to have internet. And he instructs his wife to put all these controls on. He just got an iPhone. Actually, he had a flip phone for years, right? You just got this iPhone, but it's all heavily guarded. I mean, if we could see it, that girl's got locks and things all over this thing. And he asked for it. She didn't have to come in and police him. He's policing himself. Because he made a consecration to the Lord way back when, and he's determined to stick with it. He's not like others who get out of the confines of this place, and little by little they start edging back to the old lifestyle they once had. Oh, I can handle it now. Oh, yeah, you can handle it now, sure. You better rethink that, guys. You still have a fallen nature inside you. God looks at your situation. He knows that you are going to be going back into a system that is designed to pull you into its mindset. Unfortunately, probably going back into a church culture that is not really going to take a strong stand against that system. And there's something else. God sees inside of you. And He sees the passions and the attitudes within you that want to be seduced. You better come to grips with it. The worst enemy is what lives inside of you.
Yes, sir. Yes, it is.
Now, like any good father, the Lord, if He had His way, He would do nothing but lavish you with blessings. That's what He would love to do. He would just love to bless you. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll probably say something like this here in a while. But He understands that He can't do that. He's got to institute disciplines into your life, because those passions and attitudes within you, those carnal desires that want what the world is offering, He's got to go to work on those things. Amen. Because the world is the way it is, and it's not going to change until the second coming of Christ. It's only going to get worse, in fact. That's what the Bible tells us. It's only going to get darker. It's only going to get more evil. So the change isn't going to happen in the world. If you're expecting that, forget it. You're wasting your time. The change has to happen within you. And so God understands, I've got them away from that system, out of all that contamination and all that stuff. I've got them for a short period of time here at Pure Life Ministries, and He's going to go to work on you. Instituting disciplines into your life to work a change. And you'll just, if you stay on the path, you're just going to keep changing and keep changing and keep changing. Yeah, it is awesome. All right, so there's a tremendous value in God's disciplinary system. And I'm going to lay it out in the form of blessings. So blessing number 1 is this, and you are going to be so happy to hear this one. Are you ready? You don't look like you're so happy. You look like guys who are just like, when does this thing get over with so I can go? And I said, you're going to be so happy to hear this blessing. Man, this is a rough crowd. Blessing number 1, God knows what he's doing. Look at verse 9 and 10. We had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, or as the King James says, for our profit. Either word is correct, but I like profit. That's a good way of saying it. So that we may share his holiness. All right. What a blessing to know that everything that comes into your life, everything that comes into your life must come through the filter of a God of love. He's not going to let anything come into your life that doesn't first pass his, his controls. He is going to protect you to a point. And whatever disciplines come along, he's going to completely protect you that way. But whatever disciplines come along, whatever difficulties or trials or whatever, they all have to pass through his hands. Now, many of us had fathers who disciplined us out of impatience or out of selfish motives. Maybe we did something to irritate them and they lash out in anger. How many had fathers like that? Yeah, Pastor Steve did. And, it really breeds rebellion, doesn't it? When you have a father that treats you like that. I didn't respect my father. I feared him, for a time till I got bigger than him. Then I lost my fear of him. But I didn't respect him because he didn't care about me. Right? You know what I'm talking about? Some of you do, anyway. But even the best father, even if you had a good father, just naturally, humanly speaking, he's still, limited on what he can do. And the wonderful thing about the Lord is that he never reacts out of anger. Never. I don't care what you do, God's response is going to be slow and calculated. That's the most frightening kind, really, when you think about it. He's not going to just lash out and backhand you. He may, really think through, what does this boy need right now? But that really is comforting to know that God doesn't just react that way. And like I was saying, our fathers, no matter how good they are, how good their intentions are, there's only so much they can do. Everything is guesswork with parenting. I'm not a father, but I am a father, right? I am a spiritual father, so I can see things in that way, but I'm not a parent. But I've talked to enough parents. I think I got somewhat of a handle on what they go through. And it looks like a bunch of guesswork to me. I could say to them, Adam, you don't really know what you're doing, do you? He's got a couple of kids. He loves his kids. He's over there bragging at my house last night, showing me videos hour after hour. His boy golfing. His boy's 5 years old, and he's incredible at sports. But anyway, it's all guesswork. Andrew does something wrong. Well, should I spank him? Should I put him on restriction? Should I just let this one pass? I don't know what to do. Right? I mean, that's kind of how a father, I mean, you try to do the best you can, but you don't really know for sure how to react to things. But the Lord does. The Lord knows exactly what to do in your situation and how to handle. He looks at your timeline. He sees what's happening in your life. He sees what's going on inside you. He sees what the devil's trying to do. He sees the temptations coming your way. Every discipline, he knows exactly, precisely, perfectly how to design for what your needs are. And not only that, but he knows how to measure it. You know, he doesn't give you too little or too much. Every particular situation you come into, he knows exactly how much you can handle. And he will never allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able to handle. Praise the Lord. You know, I mean, that's really good news. Because we take this stuff for granted, but think about it. What if he just really just kind of didn't have a good handle on what we could handle? Now think about that. You know, well, let's see, Jeremy needs some punishment, I think. He's been getting a little bit out of hand. Here, how about a good dose of cancer? You know? And the next time you see Jeremy's flat out, his hair's falling out and everything. Well, maybe he didn't quite need so much, Lord, you know. I mean, just because he got a little bit of an attitude one day, he probably didn't need cancer. But the Lord knows exactly what we need. And you know what else? He doesn't haphazardly dish out discipline. He's very purposeful in what he's doing in his dealings with us. He aims his discipline, pinpoints it to those attitudes or things inside of you that need to be dealt with. So he perfectly fashions it, knowing your situation, knowing your heart, knowing the things you're dealing with, knowing the things you're going to face back home or whatever, and he pinpoints with accuracy all his disciplines. And you know, the truth is, he'd prefer not to discipline. Jeremiah said he does not afflict willingly. And I tell you what, man, this is such a thing that I know from my own personal experience that this is true, that the Lord loves to bless his children. He takes such pleasure in it. Don't you love to bless your children, Adam? Yeah, I mean, it's just, that's in a father's heart. How much more so the Father of spirits? He loves to bless, you know, and I'll tell you the way it works, and I can tell you this from a lot of experience. My early days, it seemed like the disciplines were just, I mean, every time I turned around, I was getting walloped by something or other, you know, and it was hard. And those disciplines cut deeply, and they hurt. And it was at one after another, after another, after another. You know why? Because I was full of myself. I was full of myself. I was prideful. I was just everything. I just don't even need to go into it. It's just full of myself. That's the best way to say it. And so he disciplined me severely. And I don't need to go into that, but I can tell you this, that over the years, you know, at first there were occasional blessings just to keep me from, you know, really just going into despondency because of the level of discipline I was facing. So occasionally he would bless me in some little way to keep me going. But over time, now, it's like it's new blessings practically every day. It's just blessing after blessing after blessing, and occasionally a little bit of discipline. You know, that's what happens in life. as you go down your timeline, as you respond to the Lord, as you yield to His training, there's a change that's going to happen. And little by little, you're going to need that discipline less and less. And then He's going to be free to lavish you with the blessings He wants to lavish you with. Not you blessing yourself, Him blessing you. All right. Blessing number two is that God is building His character in us. Look at verse 11 again. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. All right, now this is kind of, one of those implied illustrations. He doesn't say that you are a garden and God is looking to grow, plants in this garden, but it's implied there. So He looks at you. Your life is a garden, and if you will be trained by the disciplines of the Lord, what He is saying to us here is He will be able to plant in your garden different fruit-bearing trees, plants, however you want to say it. For instance, He'll plant a plant of love. He will plant a plant of joy. He will plant a plant of peace. And on down the row, and down at the end of the row is self-control. And if you would have had your way, that would have been the first and only thing that He would have dealt with you on when you came here. But it's the last thing. And you will leave here, yes, with self-control, but how much more important to be having to experience the love of God inside you for other people. How much more to experience the deep joy of the Lord. So you don't have to go chasing after empty experiences to try to scratch some itch that can never be scratched. Wouldn't it be better if you were full of the joy of the Lord and didn't have that sense of need? So as you allow the Lord to work inside you, little by little, a garden is growing, and God is changing the landscape of your inner world. Now, compare that to the garden that you grew before you came here. Think about it. It was full of weeds like selfishness, pride, anger, resentment, perversion. That's the devil's garden, isn't it? I grew, it wasn't a garden. It was an outright whatever. It was horrible. And I spent my life nurturing my self-life. Thinking constantly, it's like, man, how stupid can someone be? When do you figure it out? It's like the more I was constantly trying to bless myself and make myself happy with the things of the world, the more miserable I was inside. The emptier I felt in life. The harder I was to get along with. And the more people wanted to not be around me and so on. And I did learn, eventually, to go a different way, and to allow the Lord to do His wonderful work inside me. So He comes along into my garden, and He starts pulling the weeds and replacing them with His plants. Where there's been ugliness, He wants to instill in you the beauty of His holiness. Think about that. Where there's been selfishness, He wants to instill a magnanimous heart inside you. A heart that's not just full of self to where there's no room for anyone else, but a big heart to where you become big-hearted towards other people. Would that be so bad? Do you have to go through life only thinking about yourself? Where there's been pride, he wants to instill humility. To where you're not the center of the universe, as Pastor Ed once was. You said it, not me. That makes you fair open game. Where there's been perversion, he wants to instill innocence. He can do it, man. He's done it inside me. I don't know how. I can't, because I can still remember certain things, and I have been corrupted in some ways I wish weren't true of me. But yet, somehow, I don't know how to explain it. It's one of those things that you can't make sense of humanly. In spite of that, in spite of the fact that I have all this carnal knowledge from my years way back when of, indulging in pornography and all that filth, in spite of that, he has put into me a childlike innocence. And he's the only one that can do that. I couldn't come up with that on my own. Where there has been fear, he wants to instill in you holy boldness. Not, not your own, just kind of cocky attitude, that kind of thing. Not that. Holy boldness. Where there's been shame, he wants to instill strength of character. Yeah, that's what his desire is. It's all good. But the reality is to uproot the weeds that are in your garden is going to be painful. You know why? It's because we have come to like those weeds. We nurture them and we don't want anything to touch them because I can't take any pain. Man. Now, I'm scoffing about where some of you are at, or are not that far removed from it, but I was totally there. Okay? So no one's laughing at you without first laughing at myself. And I should just talk about myself, because I was just a big baby, like a 2-year-old crawling through life, throwing a tantrum anytime things didn't go my way or someone crossed my will. Or I didn't get what I wanted. A red-faced baby, in the middle of Walmart throwing a fit. And man, I just cringed thinking about some of the fits I threw when I was younger. Just disgusting. But you know what? God went in there and started uprooting weeds. And he didn't ask my permission either. He just went at it. I could have ran, and avoided a lot of stuff. And some of us, that's what we've done for our whole lives, right? We've done our best. You know how in boxing, a really good boxer knows how to slip punches. And, Muhammad Ali, that was one of the things. He was just, that was, what was it? Float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. The whole thing was floating like a butterfly. Is, they could just never really hit him. Because he was just had an ability to go with the punch. And it never really landed hard. And some of you are great at slipping God's punches. He wants to knock out your self-life. But you have become so adept at this battle against him and his work inside you that you've learned how to slip his punches so nothing ever lands. That's powerful preaching, Sherman. You getting that down? All right, man. I did finally start figuring stuff out. It took me way longer than it should have, but I did start figuring it out. And once I did, I started submitting to the Lord. And really, I went through a long period of time of, what Adam's describing. I was a cop too, and that's where it started for me in 1982, cop in Los Angeles. And I know what it's like to stand up for Jesus Christ to a bunch of hard-hearted cops and have them ridicule you. I know what that's like. I did it. I know what Adam was talking about when he said he's done that. I know exactly what that's like. And it's not fun, but I did it. And, decisions like that, where you just have to do the right thing and quit being such a big baby. Who said that? Sam. All right, Sam. Who ever heard of a 6'6" Mexican anyhow, right? That just ain't right, man. That's not normal. All right, you guys are getting me totally out of whack here. Let me see. Where am I? I can look back on my lifetime and I can see how God's discipline, I thank Him for His blessings, especially in the earlier days when every little blessing that would come along occasionally was, man, thank you, Lord, that kind of thing. I had those little high spots, but mostly it was hard. Mostly it was hard. But you know what? Once you see what's going on and what the alternatives are, it doesn't matter that it's hard. You do what you got to do. Right? You do what you got to do. You go through what you got to go through. Doesn't matter if it's hard. So little by little, God started diminishing the self-life that became a haven for all these weeds. And every time self was dealt a blow, my love for sin died a little bit more. And every situation that He brought me into that somehow humbled me, that ugly pride that had just flourished in my life was diminished a little bit more. And every time I had to give up some selfish indulgence, I became a little freer inside. And He was killing the tyrant of self that had ruled in my life all those years, making me miserable. Making me miserable. And, one of the things I can say is, well, let me just say two things to you. The people who most deeply experience the joy of the Lord are those who have most deeply tasted His discipline. That's a truth. That is a truth. And the more weight God has for you to carry in His kingdom, the more He's going to require you to go through His discipline process. Guys, some of you, God's got a call on your life. He wants to use you. We're going to have a guy here in a couple of weeks, Ryan Shavo, who's a graduated a few years ago. Man, that guy's out there turning the world upside down for Christ. He was a total selfish, etc. guy. And he got put on the right path here at Pure Life. And I didn't go along and help him along the narrow path. He got it figured out between him and the Lord and has lived it out. And now he is just on fire for God. He's going to be here in a couple of weeks. We're going to have special meetings with him. Praise the Lord. The deeper God cuts, the deeper your life in God is going to be. And the richer your experience with God is going to be. And the more mature the fruit of the Spirit is going to be in your life. God knows what He's doing. And He knows how to change you. He's an expert at it. He is a master at changing human hearts. Praise the Lord. He knows what He's doing. You don't need to go to some psychological therapy program and spend $20,000 like as if because I spend $20,000 somehow that's going to magically make everything go away. Are you crazy? You can't escape yourself just because you dole out $20,000. Man, what's wrong with you? All right, blessing number 3. God is preparing you for another world. He's preparing you for another world. You don't think about it much, but He is preparing you for another world. Wow, what a thought. You know, one of the great fallacies that have been propagated in the church is that you walk the aisle, you say the prayer, you go to an evangelical church, and one day you die, and you go to heaven, and everything is just happily ever after. No. That is a bunch of superficial nonsense created by people who don't even know the Lord and know hardly anything about the things of God. No, that's not what Scripture teaches. That's what the God of this age teaches. Because He wants to diminish what God is presenting and offering. And He's constantly blinding the eyes of people so that they don't see the realities of God's kingdom. The reality is that God is looking to do a work inside of us and to transform us and mold us. And we will one day, as Adam shared, we will stand before the Lord, and like he said, it's only going to be you or me, and there's not going to be any gang around us. It's just going to be us standing before this mighty being who came to earth and lived the life of a man and died a horrible death, and He's going to be looking at our lives to find out what did we do with what was given to us. That's reality. And it will be real one day. It may not seem very real to you now, but I promise you on that day you're going to wish that you had taken it more serious. Because everything hinges on it. Look at verse 11. Look at a couple of terms there. All discipline for the moment. And then in the next clause, or at the end, afterwards. For the moment and afterwards. And that really sums up sort of the crux of Christianity. The fools of this earth live for now, don't they? That was me. All I could think about was now. All I could think about is what pleasure am I going to get out of this, or what suffering or pain am I going to get out of it. That's all I could see. Everything hinged on, as I proceeded through every day of my life, everything hinged on how it was going to make me feel at that moment. Well, that's how the world lives. If that describes your life, how are you any different than the unsaved? Right? Am I telling the truth? Somehow we got it in our heads that just because we call ourselves Christians and go to a church, that somehow that obligates God to allow us into His kingdom. Let me tell you who's going to be in His kingdom. Who is there now? People who obeyed the Lord. People who responded to the Lord's voice. People who had a hunger for His kingdom. People who acted like they belonged there. Not like they belong in this world. People who act like the people who live there right now. There is a transformation that should be going on in your character. That's what it says here, that we may share His holiness. It is the process of sanctification. That is part of what happens. If you truly are converted, then that only begins a process that's preparing you for another world. You know, fools live for the moment, for the now. That's all they can see. They don't have the ability or the desire to look out ahead at where things are headed, where they are going with their daily decisions. But people of God see that there are consequences to our actions. And we just heard it again, as I said, we just heard it out of Galatians 6. You reap what you sow. All right, so I'm wrapping it up now. Your response is going to determine what happens in your life. And if you look at this passage, it's interesting to me that every other verse touches on something to do with our attitude about God's discipline or our response to His working in our life or whatever. In verse 3, we're told to consider Jesus and His sufferings, lest we become weary and discouraged. In verse 5, we're told not to despise the chastening of the Lord and not to be discouraged when you're rebuked by Him. In verse 7, we're told to endure discipline. In verse 9, we're told to be in subjection to the Father of spirits. And in verse 11, we're told that we will yield the peaceful fruit of righteousness if we allow ourselves to be trained by the discipline. You know, it's that conditional promise. It's written all through this. That if we will cooperate with the Lord, if we will embrace what He brings into our life, then He promises to do something inside of us. Something that will endure forever. Something we will, there's only one thing you're going to carry into the next world, and that's your character. All the money, all the stuff you own back home, all that, you're going to leave it all behind. The one thing you will have is you. Your character. Now, I want to end this. I had this thought come to me this morning. I want to talk about 3 individuals here at Pure Life, and that is the 3 women. We're down to 3 women here at Pure Life nowadays. Sister Carol, Sister Carla, and the Queen Bee herself. Now I know my wife, but I know also very intimately Carol and Carla. I know their lives. I've been very involved in their lives to one extent or another. I hope I'm not crossing lines here. Carla's not here to rebuke me, and we won't tell her what I say, okay? Carla is a nice person. But you know what? She's always been a nice person. And when she came here 10 years ago, has it been 10? 10 years ago. I remember Carla when she came here 10 years ago. And I could see, because it's Pastor Steve's job, and God has uniquely given him gifts in this area, I could see inside Carla, and I could see the self-life thriving in there. For her, it looked different than it looked for most of us. But I could see it, whatever. I saw what was there, and we ministered to her, Kathy did, and so on. And you know what? I have seen God introduce His disciplines into her life down through the years. I mean, You watch this woman drag herself in here week after week after week, pulling behind that oxygen tank. And now this latest thing, this surgery on her hip and all this. This woman has suffered. And you know what I see? Not someone who's becoming embittered, more full of herself because of it, but someone who's becoming sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. And when she prays, man, it's like the Lord just fills the room when Sister Carla prays. Well, that didn't happen because she's a nice person. It happened because she yielded to God's work in her life. And I've seen her changing over the years. And she's so far ahead of me. Man, she is a godly woman. And then there's Carol. I don't know why Carol's not here this morning, but Carol, I'm dealing with her a situation right now. A pastor friend of mine has sent this woman to us for help. And so Carol had her first counseling session with her the other day. And so my friend's calling me, badgering me about, what's going on? All this. She's actually the wife of a pastor in his church. And so I called her up and I said, okay, Carol, what's happening with this woman? And Carol sat there. I mean, she's had one session with this woman. It was incredible the amount of discernment she had. I couldn't believe it. I need to tell her about it. But I was just so impressed with, she just laid it out. Bam, 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 bam. She read that woman's book in one session, 40 minutes or however long she spent on the phone with her. She knows exactly what the deal is with this woman. And you know why? Because she's also been here 10 years and she has gone through some very hard times with a husband who was a nightmare, and finally dumped her and went and married a younger woman and left her high and dry, 54 years old, with no possibility of income. She has suffered. And yet God has carried her, taken care of her, protected her, and brought her along, and she is just becoming more and more Christ-like. It's such a blessing to see what happens when people respond to the Lord. And then there's my wife. No, I'm just joking. I won't say much. It'd be too self-serving. But I will say that my wife is a real blessing to me. And she has been through her own sufferings and disciplines of the Lord. And I know them firsthand. I've been the source of most of them. Not many women are blessed like that. But she was hand-chosen to receive that blessing. But she's a woman of God. She's not just sitting up here because she happens to be the wife of the founder or something, or because she helped me found the ministry. She walks with the Lord. And when she speaks, she doesn't get up here and speak very often. She's reluctant. But when sometimes, the Lord, she is shaking when she comes up here, because the Lord has to just practically fall upon her to get her up here. And I don't need to tell you, if you've heard her speak, that the Lord comes through. Well, there's a reason for that. It's not because she read some good, deeper life books. It's not because she, whatever. It's because she went through the processes that God put her through, and she responded. Men, don't shortchange yourself. Go for all that God has for you. It's not just a matter of gaining, the victory over some particular problem. Okay, so let's say that God gave you just exactly what you asked for. God, all I want, like Adam was saying, all I want is just zap me and get this sexual addiction out of my life so I won't be plagued with it. And you go home and you live for the things of this earth. You're still selfish, still full of pride, still full of yourself. Still a nightmare to your family. No spiritual leadership in the home. No one really wants to be around you. Are you sure you want to settle for that? Or would it be better to just embrace, to suck it up, and embrace all that God brings into your life? And let Him mold you. And let Him turn you into someone who is full of the Spirit of God. Wouldn't that be better?
Before we go, we have exciting news. Registration has officially opened for our 2018 annual conference. The dates are April 27th and 28th and will be held in Florence, Kentucky. To get all the details, including registration prices, schedule, hotel information, and more, visit conference.purelifeministries.org. For Pure Life Ministries, I'm Nate Dancer. See you next time.
Purity for Life is a production of Pure Life Ministries. For over 30 years, Pure Life Ministries has been the go-to for those whose lives have been devastated by sexual sin. Visit us on the web for more information about our life-changing counseling programs and powerful teaching materials. Also check out our video clips of men and women whose lives have been radically transformed. All that and more at purelifeministries.org.